Hello and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I'm of course your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 274th episode, our guest is Stephen Fagin. Stephen Fagin is the curator of the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza and author of Assassination and Commemoration. Since joining the museum in 2000, he has appeared in numerous documentaries and television programs and given hundreds of media interviews, including appearances on The Today Show and Good Morning America. Fagin, who holds degrees from Southern Methodist University and the University of Oklahoma, also serves as associate editor of Legacies Dallas History Journal. A quick programming note. In many ways, this episode has been 12 years in the making. In early 2013, when I was night editor of the Kokomo Tribune, a reader came into the office carrying a stack of yellowing editions of the newspaper. She said she had found them in her parents' attic and wanted to see if we wanted them before they headed to the trash heap. In the stack were 3 copies concerning the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the November 23rd, 24th, and 27th, 1963 editions of the paper. A few months later, in November 2013, I wrote a story about these historical newspapers and also a column about the assassination itself. After I left the Kokomo Tribune in 2017, I packed these newspapers up in a box and mostly didn't look at them for the next few years. Then, a few months ago, I found out I would have the opportunity to travel to Dallas for a work conference. I contacted the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza to see if they might be interested in receiving these newspapers as a donation. I also asked if someone from the museum might be available to be a guest on this podcast. Megan Bryant, Director of Collections and Intellectual Property, kindly responded and said that they would be glad to accept this donation. She also put me in touch with Stephen, who also kindly agreed to be interviewed while I was there. So, this past week, I carefully packed the newspapers in my bag and headed to Dallas. After my conference finished, I headed over to the museum. I met Megan and handed over the newspapers, which are now housed under the prestigious title of the Rob Burgess Collection. Stephen and I then made our way to their studio on the first floor of the former Texas Schoolbook Depository, which was a surreal experience to say the least. After we recorded this episode, I then had a chance to take the elevator to the 6th floor to check out the museum itself. During my visit, I also had the opportunity to hear Stephen deliver one of his weekly gallery talks, in which he featured Lee Harvey Oswald's 14-karat gold wedding band. It was an amazing experience, and I encourage anyone who is interested in the JFK assassination to make a point to visit. It is well worth your time. Thank you to Megan, Stephen, and the rest of the museum staff for such a wonderful experience. In the show notes, I have also included links to photos of these historical newspapers I donated, along with photos I took while I was in Dallas of Dealey Plaza, the John F. Kennedy Memorial Plaza, the stockade fence behind the grassy knoll, and the museum itself. I have also included links to my 2013 story, the column I wrote, and a 2019 story I wrote when I was editor of the Wabash Plain Dealer, in which I had the opportunity to interview the late great musician David Crosby, including about his long-held belief that Kennedy was murdered by a conspiracy featuring multiple shooters. And now on to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This is a real honor. I really appreciate it.
My great pleasure.
So if for the people who don't know who you are, if you wouldn't mind go ahead and telling us a little bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. My name is Stephen Fagin. I am curator of the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza, and we're located inside the former Texas Schoolbook Depository building at the site of the Kennedy assassination in Dallas.
Yeah, and I love history. It's always been my favorite subject from when I was a kid, and the Kennedy assassination in particular has always been a subject of fascination for me. And I got here on Sunday, and I made sure that was my first stop after I checked into the hotel was Dealey Plaza. And I'm sure you've heard this before, but when I first visited and walked around, I had the strongest sense of deja vu, because I have thought about this place and turned it over in my mind and seen the diagrams and thought about it from every angle. It's like I've never been to Texas before, let alone Dallas, but it just always like, wow, this is so amazing. But have you encountered people saying things like that before?
Yeah, absolutely. I usually hear two things about the plaza when visitors come for the first time. One, they do get that sense of deja vu because the setting, the architectural features of the space, they're so familiar. It's unusual for a vehicular park at the edge of an urban sprawl like Dallas to have such international recognizability. But the other thing people typically say is that the plaza looks smaller in person than it appears in films and photographs. And that is true because the camera does tend to give the plaza kind of an expanse that is not there. It's a very quaint 3-acre park.
Right.
And I think that kind of speaks to the broader historical significance of this story because we have an expectation that these sites stained by violence and tragedy are going to be enormous to fit the magnitude of the event that took place here. So it's kind of disconcerting to see just this little park, this vehicular park that cars drive through all day, and yet recognize that it's like a Civil War battlefield. It's one of those few sites in this country where, looking at a geographic spot, you can say with some certainty that world history changed right here.
Absolutely. Now, how similar is Dealey Plaza today to what it was in 1963? To me, it looks pretty similar, and I'm sure that steps have been taken over the years to ensure that. But what's changed? What's different?
Remarkably, Dealey Plaza was not named a National Historic Landmark District until 1993, 30 years after the assassination.
Incredible.
And it was at that moment that the surrounding buildings, the architecture of the space were protected. Prior to that, it was really, just a grassroots effort by the local community to, for example, save this building from being torn down. There have been cosmetic changes. The famous Stemmons Freeway sign that you see in the Zapruder film is gone. The original light pole has been replaced. The building itself has had a few cosmetic changes. There was a nice kind of mid-century breeze block wall along the ground floor that was removed in the 70s, and most famously the Hertz Rent-A-Car billboard from on top of the building that was there from 1959 to 1979 when it was taken down because it was tearing the building apart. It was damaging the structural integrity of the building. But apart from those like cosmetic changes, I mean, it still feels very much like the plaza we see in the black and white news footage and the color home movies from the day of the assassination.
Right. And now I walked behind the parking lot where the fence is, and I figured that fence couldn't be the same fence that it was in 1963, right? That's been replaced?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to guess, but I would say it's probably about the 24th fence.
The wood looked very new.
There are photos going back to, say the mid to late 60s where virtually all the pickets are gone from that stockade fence because people visiting the site, particularly in the years after, would take these souvenirs. A chain link kind of protective barrier was added around, I want to say, the 50th anniversary in 2013, but even then the fence has still been replaced. You might notice that people do leave messages. It's a site where people want to leave their mark because they were here, and oftentimes articulate what they believe may have happened there on the day of the assassination.
I took many photos of people's theories there, and we'll get to that for sure. But tell me a little bit about the museum itself. How did the museum come to be? You mentioned that the building was nearly, not lost to history, but what was the progression from then to now?
Well, if I can give you a slightly long answer, we'll actually go back and kind of set the scene. Dallas came under a great deal of international criticism after the assassination because Dallas had already had a reputation as being kind of a hotbed of radical political activity. When Kennedy was killed here, there was this kind of global sigh, Dallas, that's where things like this happen. That Dallas is the type of toxic environment where violence and extremism can thrive. And so the local community was very, very sensitive to its reputation, and especially to this site. Dealey Plaza became the most visited site in the city within 24 hours of the assassination, and the Texas School Book Depository was called, I believe in 1964, the world's most famous warehouse and one of the world's most photographed structures. So certainly anybody visiting this area was drawn to this site because they connected the assassination to Dallas. Well, for local folks, that was horrifying because it was the darkest moment in the city's modern history. I've studied a great deal about the building and sort of the local feelings towards this site, and there are some really remarkable letters to the editor in the Dallas newspapers in the late 60s and early 70s. I mean, calling this building a manifestation of evil, staring out with vacant and accusing eyes. It's really, it is really remarkable. In fact, I've got another great quote I can share. There was a sports writer in Dallas, passed away years ago, named Blackie Sherritt, and Blackie was a Dallasite, and he certainly was sensitive to this building and the plaza, and he wrote in one of his anniversary stories, I'll see if I can get this right, to Dallas old-timers, this tragedy has become like a birthmark on your child's face. The blemish is there, but you've become accustomed to it so that it is no longer a constant heartache. Not until a stranger remarks about it, not until you drive past the old school book depository and see tourists staring up at that 6th floor window and unstrapping their Kodaks, and you still feel, however faintly, that stir of resentment, and you realize that day and its dark shadow will never be erased from memory. So I think that really, it's a little dramatic, but it really characterizes kind of how people felt towards this site. And so when the textbook distribution warehouse moved out in 1970, there was this public outcry, Dallas would be better served if this building, this manifestation of evil, no longer existed. And so throughout the 70s, it was briefly owned by a music promoter who tried to raise money to open up a kind of a for-profit museum and shrine, but he lost ownership of the building. He couldn't find any financial support. And so it just kind of sat there, and a number of prominent local residents, including people like Tom Landry and Ross Perot and Mary Kay of Mary Kay Cosmetics, all voiced this opinion that Dallas would be better served without this building. There was even an organization that pledged a certain amount of money to buy the building, to tear it down and build a park or a parking lot. Ultimately, what happened, there was this public works director for Dallas County who officed across the street, and he saw from his office window just millions of people coming to the plaza, having a very unsatisfying experience, coming up to the locked doors of this building, wandering the grass with no interpretation, apart from, researchers and street vendors who were there, a presence since going all the way back to late 1963, people selling newspapers and things. And he realized that if this building that we're in today gets torn down, it would be tantamount to admitting some culpability in the assassination. And he didn't want Dallas to feel that sense of guilt and shame. And he recognized that as public works director that the county was desperately in need of office and storage space. And so ultimately, he arranged through a bond package in 1977 for Dallas County, the government, to buy this building and transform the first 5 floors into the new seat of county government. And so for 40 years, from 81 to 2021, this was the seat of county government with the commissioner's court and public works and the civil division of the DA's office. And the idea was suddenly this building, which was renamed the Dallas County Administration Building, was now a useful part of the community. It was contributing to the community instead of, in the words of that writer, staring out with vacant and accusing eyes. But Judson Shook also knew that the 6th floor was considered sacred space for many. I mean, and who would want to have their office in that corner window on the 6th floor? And so he asked these 2 remarkable ladies, Lyndalyn Adams, who was a local preservation activist, and a historian from Virginia named Conover Hunt, to basically spearhead what became a 12-year project to open a tasteful exhibition that would kind of contextualize the assassination and offer people a view onto the landscape of Dealey Plaza. And ultimately, their efforts resulted in the opening of the sixth floor exhibit that opened in 1989, 36 years ago. And that exhibit, which is still, I mean, you can still see the bulk of that original exhibition on the sixth floor, has grown and evolved into the sixth floor museum at Dealey Plaza. Today we have 2 exhibition floors. We have the original core exhibit on the sixth floor, which has been updated and enhanced over the years. And then we also have a 7th floor gallery space that changes with different programs and exhibits. And the museum as an institution, we're an accredited institution by the American Alliance of Museums. We have grown in terms of our collections, films, photographs, newspapers, including the newspapers that you so kindly donated to the museum today from Indiana, and our oral history project, which is near and dear to my heart. We have recorded more than 2,500 interviews with people from around the world about their 60s experience, exploring, the life, death, and legacy of John F. Kennedy, but also the broader history and culture of the 1960s. And so it's been my great honor over the last couple decades to talk to civil rights activists and Peace Corps volunteers, anti-war demonstrators, Vietnam veterans, NASA personnel, people that really reflect that experience, as well as hundreds of 1960s school kids who share that common bond of being in class and remembering their teacher or their principal or the loudspeaker informing them of the assassination. And it's remarkable, that commonality of experience from coast to coast. If you were in a class that day, you will always remember how your peers reacted, how your teacher reacted, and what the rest of that weekend was like sitting in front of black and white television.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, my mom has a very similar story of being a schoolgirl at the time. And yeah, it was definitely, my version is 9/11, of course, but yeah, but I think that was the kind of when the world stopped for everyone. But I'm very glad that this building's still here. I mean, like you said, I mean, people were going to come anyway, so it almost seems a disservice to not at least, try to have some place for people to go. But it's so interesting that I hear what you're saying, that there are people in the community that didn't want it. They just want to forget about it and move on. But I mean, there seems like there's no way to do that without it seeming like you're trying to sweep it under the rug and not, honor the event.
It's interesting that when the museum opened, it was as if Dallas was internalizing that dark moment in time. The front page headline of the Dallas Times-Herald that day, the day the museum opened, said, "Today we stand whole again." There was this idea that this was Dallas coming full circle. This was a cathartic moment for the community. And we experienced a similar moment at the 50th anniversary when the city of Dallas held the very first commemorative ceremony in the plaza. There had been commemorative events over at the Kennedy Memorial a couple blocks away, largely arranged by the local Democratic Party. But as far as the city of Dallas staging its own kind of commemorative event, that happened for the first and only time on the 50th anniversary. So that too was considered a cathartic moment for the community, as decades removed, and as memory becomes history. You have this moment where Dallas can recognize this dark moment, but also recognize the progress that the community has made in the years since. And so we're now, interestingly, this building, which was so controversial, is now part of the cultural landscape of Dallas. It's a strange and remarkable evolution.
Definitely. Now, obviously, this is not the only museum in the country that is focused on JFK. Do you have a relationship with his presidential library or any other museums around the country that focus on his life? Do you have different perspectives, or how does that work?
Well, we don't have any formal relationship or connection to the John F. Kennedy Library in Boston. Certainly we have utilized photographs and research information and things like that from them over the years. And I know they have sent individuals to us if they have artifacts being offered for donation that would be more appropriate here as opposed to at the library. So yeah, there's no formal connection, but certainly we hold deep respect for our kind of the kindred spirit of honoring John F. Kennedy's life and legacy.
Absolutely. So how'd you get such a cool job?
I'm a native Dallasite. Okay. My parents were both elementary school kids in Dallas at the time of the assassination, and like so many, it's a very common story in our oral history project, and I have interviewed my parents. It's a common thread that local kids were so impacted by this event that essentially happened in their backyard that they became really fascinated and interested. And that was certainly the case for my mom, more so than my dad. My mom became a collector of books and an enthusiast who would watch documentaries. And I grew up immersed in that environment with a deep appreciation for an international event that was very much my local history. And I went to Southern Methodist University and majored in history and English, and it was my history advisor who encouraged me to get an internship here at the sixth floor museum. And so that internship was actually in 2000, and the museum hired me a year later. My job title has changed 5 times over the years, but I have been here for almost 25 years now. I did go back to school and get a master's in museum studies from the University of Oklahoma, and it was OU Press that published my book, which was based on the master's thesis that I wrote about the institutional history of the museum. But yeah, this has always been a subject which is near and dear to my heart, and it's interesting as a non-rememberer, somebody without that connection to the story. I feel so much like as a vessel, as a custodian of all these recollections that people have shared with me over the years. I feel like an almost honorary member of 1963, as if I lived the experience myself, and it's given me a deep and persistent respect for the story and the storytellers, and a infectious enthusiasm to share that passion for this subject with our visitors and with school groups from around the country.
Definitely. Now, we mentioned it a little bit before, but people have some theories. People have a lot of theories about what happened. I noticed that some of the sign, like you mentioned, the picket fence, people leave notes there. I also noticed on the plaque outside the building, the word allegedly scratched around it. I noticed that the website on the memorial is scratched out. Like people have strong feelings. They want to leave their mark, and they want people to know. But how do you kind of deal with all those different theories people come here with? It's just so many conflicting ideas about people have what happened. So,
well, the museum doesn't take a position on the assassination. We present, of course, the findings of the Warren Commission investigation that concluded, based on their evidence, that Lee Harvey Oswald likely acted alone. There was no evidence of a conspiracy. But we also kind of delve into some of the later forensic and ballistics and acoustic studies, the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the 70s, which did conclude that there was a likely second shot or a second gunman on the grassy knoll, although that acoustical evidence is quite controversial.
Yes.
And we end the exhibit, or before we get to the legacy of President Kennedy, we end the assassination section of the exhibit by really focusing on the lingering questions and a wall labeled conspiracy, where we briefly touch on some of the more popular theories that exist about, Russia and Cuba, the mafia, the CIA, the FBI, Lyndon Johnson.
Right.
The thing is that we want our visitors to look out those windows and decide for themselves what happened here. I have not voiced a personal opinion about the assassination to anyone in 25 years.
I was going to break some news here on the Rob Burgess Show, but.
It's one of those subjects that people are very passionate about.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I've had, of course, the honor of being up on the 6th floor a number of times with different groups and individuals, and we make our way down that corridor towards the inevitability of the assassination. We look out those windows and they kind of look at the landscape of the plaza, and it's really interesting to kind of watch their eyes and watch those wheels turning, because whatever kind of baggage they brought to that window validates their worldview. If they believe that Oswald was likely the lone gunman, they see how small the plaza is, that relatively small 88-yard stretch from window to the spot where the fatal shot was fired. And it all seems very likely and reasonable. But if they come here with a different perspective, if they come here thinking there's got to be more to the story, then suddenly they see out those same windows a triangulation of crossfire with a gunman in the grassy knoll, maybe another gunman on the lower floors of the Daltex building or the roof of the records building. And I have heard this as people try to map it out in their minds. Why wouldn't Oswald shoot Kennedy coming towards the building on Houston as opposed to waiting to Elm Street? And so it's fascinating how the same perspective is seen through the prism of people's decades worth of experience with books and magazines, and for younger people, comic books and TV shows. I mean, the entry points for this story are the Umbrella Academy. I'm fascinated by the pop culture resonance of the Kennedy assassination. It's one of my favorite topics because I'm interested in how younger people, and I meet so many younger people who have a almost lifelong fascination with this. I'm curious how they get interested, what hooks them, and whether it was catching a A&E documentary one night or coming across a conspiracy website, or maybe watching the Oliver Stone movie JFK.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Or if it is just something as simple as that brief scene in Watchmen or the graphic novel, it's really interesting to see what people bring to this site. But at the end of the day, Gallup has done polling, and it's found that going all the way back to 1963, there's never been a moment when less than half the American public did not believe in a Kennedy assassination conspiracy. What I find fascinating about the Gallup polls is how we see the evolution of belief shift depending upon the tenor of the time. So, for example, there's a spike to 81% of the American public believing in an assassination conspiracy in the 70s, post-Vietnam, post-Watergate, growing mistrust of the government, kind of the rise of paranoia. So, of course, it reaches a fever pitch then. But then it also spikes again a few years after the Oliver Stone film, which introduced a whole new generation to the mysteries of this subject and helped to prompt the John F. Kennedy Records Collection Act and a growing interest in a lot of new books. It spiked again. So it's like whatever the circumstances are in the country at that time, it often informs what we think about an event that happened now more than 60 years ago. But at times, 25, 30, 45 years ago, it's easy to apply our beliefs onto an event from the past because we seek understanding and we also seek kind of commonality. And so you find news groups. Before, in the old days, it was like newsletters and things like that. Now it's more online forums and things. You find like-minded individuals that share your passion and share your beliefs, and you see this widespread belief that either Oswald was involved, but there were others involved with him, or a large number of people who believe Oswald wasn't involved in the assassination at all. And I love talking to people with these different perspectives. I say talking, I love listening to these people with different perspectives because really It's funny. I will have people contact me and they'll want to talk, but really what they want to do is they want to share with me their beliefs,
Sure.
and that's okay. I enjoy being the custodian of all of those feelings, because it's not just memories; it's also powerful feelings and theories, and there is a tremendous amount of assassination research and scholarship out there that does demand attention. There are lingering questions that I can't offer answers to, which is why, the museum, and by extension myself, we don't take a position on what happened out here, other than the fact that we lost our 35th president, and his death certainly had a tremendous impact on the nation and the world.
Yeah. Well, it's that quote, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. So I think that fits with what you're saying. Because, when I looked over that, when I was on the, what was that what is that called? The white thing? The
pergola.
The pergola, there you go. When I was looking over the fence at the grassy knoll, the stockade fence, I got this eerie feeling, but I'm like, I'm bringing that to this, because I think that there was something going on, and I've heard all the wildest theories you can imagine. I'm sure you have too. People coming out of drain pipes with guns, and the umbrella guy with there's some kind of like poison dart coming out, and so there's like that Onion headline. I'm sure you've seen Kennedy. What was it? Kennedy president shot 129 times from 43 different angles.
Yeah, that's right.
But okay, so I'm glad you mentioned the JFK movie. That had such a big impact on the public perception of this. First of all, on an artistic level, I think it's an amazing movie. Oliver Stone's one of my favorite directors. It may be one of his best movies, I think. Of course, factually, there's things that he presents in the movie that are either kind of an invention of script writing, or he had it wrong. For example, the umbrella guy that I mentioned, he was implying that he was somehow signaling, but later it came out that he was protesting JFK's father. The guy having the seizure, he claims that that guy disappeared, and that guy later turned up and had a receipt, so he showed that he was there. David Ferry never had a scene where he confessed like that. But that kind of caused people to throw everything about the movie away. And I do think, because it is based on the book Crossfire, and I do think that there are a lot of things that he says in that movie that are verifiable and factually accurate. So how did that movie influence public perception? What do you think about that movie in terms of how it kind of changed the whole story?
Well, it is a fascinating film. I did see it in theaters back in December of 1991 when it was first released, and I remember kind of Kennedy assassination fever gripping the country. I was already interested in this subject, so it was really wild to have this kind of niche, as a kid, have a niche interest in an event like this, and suddenly see it kind of blow up into a mainstream news story. And it was fueled by a lot of the kind of tabloid magazine shows of the day, like Hard Copy and A Current Affair. I feel like they kind of, the Kennedy assassination was really their bread and butter for years, and a lot of books that kind of came out after the Stone film. A lot of eyewitnesses like Jean Hill, the Lady in Red, writing her autobiography as a result of JFK. In fact, Oliver Stone wrote the foreword to her book. So suddenly you have this abundance of information, and you have it packaged in the Stone film with this heightened sense of reality and paranoia. I mean, really, Oliver Stone's JFK is a brilliant phantasmagoria of conspiracy conjecture. It takes aspects of so many different beliefs and kind of churns them into this widespread belief that, there's something lurking behind every shadow. There's something hiding in every piece of footage, and it's hypnotic and intoxicating. Now, you notice I'm not talking about the accuracy of it. I'm talking about the feeling that it evokes. When I can speak, with statistical information, that when the film came out, it quadrupled attendance at this exhibit, because we had opened in 1989. The Oliver Stone film came along just a couple of years later in 1991. It kind of changed our visitation patterns for years and years and years, and was one of the catalysts that kind of helped spur this evolution of the original exhibit, which many people thought might be temporary, into a collecting institution and a museum. The Oliver Stone film played a crucial role in kind of the expansion and development of the sixth floor exhibit. So there's a connection there as well. Not to mention the fact that 2 weeks of principal photography took place right outside here.
Right.
There's a fascinating story about the hurdles that Oliver Stone had to go through to reroute some 20,000 automobiles every day, because this is a major artery into and out of downtown.
Yeah.
That's not an exaggeration. About 20,000 cars rerouted every day for 2 weeks, not to mention the fact that he wanted to film in and around the seat of Dallas County government, and trim the trees back to their 1963 appearance, put styrofoam breeze blocks on the ground floor of this building to make it appear as it did on the day of the assassination, even going so far as taking the parking lot that we have now today and covering it with faux gravel and railroad tracks, and building an extension of the depository's old loading dock there. I mean, the attention to detail is outstanding, and you don't see 80% of that in the quick flashes that we see from the plaza, but it was all there, and he went to great lengths to recreate Dealey Plaza of 1963, not quite 30 years after the event. So I'm forever fascinated by the Stone film, and I watch it every couple of years, not as a historian, not as curator of this museum. I watch it because it reminds me that this story matters, and it reminds me that what we do here is still relevant, it's still significant, and it's still this almost Shakespearean story of tragedy that remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries.
Great. Well, my next question was, I was going to ask you what you think, but I guess you're not going to tell me. Maybe one day you'll tell me. But in preparation for my visit, I read several more books about the assassination, one of which is Mortal Error, which presupposes that a Secret Service misfire from the car behind was the source of the fatal shot. What do you make of this theory? And I think I heard something about there was a film that somebody recovered that showed that it maybe couldn't have happened. I don't know. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great example of one of these theories that kind of never goes away. It just kind of gets repackaged and evolves over time. That theory goes back to a fellow named Howard Donahue, who was a ballistics expert, and he concluded that the explosive fatal wound was likely friendly fire accidentally discharged by George Hickey, a Secret Service agent riding in the back of the Secret Service follow-up vehicle. In the 70s, when this theory first emerged, it got very little traction. Even dedicated members of the conspiracy community were not really interested in entertaining that as a theory, in part because it suggests that there really was only one gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, and that the conspiratorial shot, the second gunman, was actually a Secret Service agent firing by accident. So it kind of goes away for a little while, but then, as you mentioned, Mortal Error by Bonner Menninger, who I know, and I've done an oral history with him in this room, he kind of brought that theory back in 1992, a year after the Oliver Stone movie. Again, I believe it was in production prior to that, but certainly it benefited from the new light that was shined on that by that film on the case. And so Mortal Error comes out. I know it did lead to some legal issues with George Hickey, who was still alive at that time in the early 90s. And then we fast forward to, it came around again in 2013 when a documentary came out, JFK, The Smoking Gun. And it was an Australian police detective named Colin McCarran who did a kind of a new study of that theory and believed that it was, very likely what happened. Well, I mean, it's one of those things that people do believe in. People ask me about it all the time. We do. I think the film you're referring to is a home movie shot by a guy named Charles Bronson, not the actor, but a bystander at Dealey Plaza. We think about the assassination in terms of the Zapruder film. Sure. It's our clock. It's what we imagine when we think of the assassination. Right. But really, there were 4 home movie cameras on Kennedy at the moment of that fatal shot. In addition to Zapruder, there was the Orville Nix film, the Marie Muchmore film, and Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson was the farthest away, and he only got 2.5 seconds of the assassination on film. However, his film is significant because it's the only one that shows the Secret Service follow-up car. And there does not appear to be any visual evidence of a gun discharging. The thing where Hickey would have to kind of slip backwards and the gun would have to accidentally discharge.
He said maybe he went forward, though.
Or forward. Yeah. But I mean, there's no sense.
Because they braked real fast.
There's no sense of sudden movement in the vehicle or any kind of a muzzle flash or anything that would signify a shot. However, it's still one of those theories that, despite there being a home movie showing Agent Hickey at the time, granted from a significant distance, it's still one of those theories that people question and ask me about and seek clarification on when they visit the plaza. And again, I kind of feel like my role sometimes is to just help our audiences navigate a minefield of interpretive history.
I know.
That's really kind of the role of the curator through our collections and our exhibits and our programming and our education, but not drawing conclusions. We just try to give audiences the tools so that they can come to their own conclusions.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do subscribe to that particular theory, and then there's plenty of others that would argue that that's not possible whatsoever. So
that's one of those theories that doesn't seem to make anyone happy. Like it's not going to make the people that think Oswald was alone, and it's not going to make the people think that there was a conspiracy happy. So it's like it kind of exists in this netherworld. But going back to videos, you can maybe tell me which one this is, but. And the reason I have that feeling that I described about the grassy knoll is that one of the strongest, this isn't evidence more than just a feeling, but there's a video of, this is right after the shots are fired, of people bolting towards the grassy knoll. Do you know that video I speak of?
Yeah, it's the Mark Bell film. It's one of the films in our collection.
Okay.
So the Dallas police motorcycle officer, I believe Clyde Haygood, dropped his motorcycle and kind of ran in that direction, really running towards the railroad overpass, running up that way. And, people that are just shell-shocked. I mean, completely flummoxed by what has just happened. Almost all the eyewitnesses felt like the first sound was firecrackers or a motorcycle backfiring, because remember, lots of police motorcycles in that parade. But by the third shot, obviously, whether or not they had seen the impact of the bullet on President Kennedy, they were aware that shots were being fired. So people were running and screaming and falling on the ground. The Newman family covered their children on the grass famously. But seeing that police officer run up that way did encourage several other people to follow. Right. That film, the Mark Bell film, has been used, and there's others too. There's other films showing that it certainly did happen. This kind of mad rush up the grassy knoll towards the stockade fence. I mean, that's been used to demonstrate, that all of these individuals definitely heard shots coming from that area. The later testimony and interviews and things don't necessarily speak to that. I know that the Warren Commission identified, I think, about 120 eyewitnesses. The House Select Committee in the 70s, closer to 200, including ear witnesses. A majority of them felt like the shots came from the Texas School Book Depository when pinned down to where they thought the shots originated. The House Select Committee, interestingly, it was a little over 40%, I think, weren't really able to determine where they thought the shots came from. What is interesting, though, is that only about 2%, if I'm correct, about 2% felt like shots came from more than one location, which is kind of interesting. But regardless of that, I mean, there were at least, between the railroad folks and Dealey Plaza witnesses, there were probably at least 30 of the eyewitnesses that felt like a shot may have come from that direction. It's complicated in part because Dealey Plaza has this gentle curve downhill towards the freeway surrounded by buildings, so shots reverberate, and that can play tricks on where you feel like the shots are coming from. Even Bill Newman, who was the closest, he and his wife Gail, the closest civilian eyewitnesses to the president at the moment of the fatal shot, 15 minutes after the assassination on local television, he says the shots came from behind him and up by the mall, which has been interpreted to mean the grassy knoll. But Bill and Gail are still alive in their 80s now. But over the years, he's kind of backed off of that and really clarified that it was the visual impact of what he was seeing made him think it was coming from directly behind them, but also behind them could be more than one location. He meant behind in a general way. Again, this speaks to the nature of eyewitness accounts kind of shifting, changing, amplifying over time. But I do think it's indicative of how some eyewitnesses, said something that day, like the Newmans or like Gene Hill, and then later on they told a slightly different story. In Bill's case, he just feels like it's more of a clarification that he was not able to pinpoint the exact origin of where those shots came from.
It's so hard and I'm a reporter, so I've covered trials before, and eyewitness and ear witness testimony is so unreliable. You can't, what I mean? People's memories are so malleable, and it'll change based on when they talk to other people and stuff. So it's so hard to pin down the truth from that, even that are people that are there. So
Bill used to tell me this funny story that he would come down to the plaza a lot. Bill and Gail Newman, being so close at the time, not called to testify before the Warren Commission, I do want to point out, though they did do depositions at the Dallas County Sheriff's Department. The story that Bill has told me is that he's come down to the plaza a lot to do documentaries, where he's on camera and he's asked to stand where he stood that day. And he says he's noticed over the years that based upon the perspective of that documentary, the camera will position themselves so that when he famously says behind him, when he gestures, the camera is in the perfect angle to either mean this building or the grassy knoll, because the plaza is so small that when you gesture behind me, depending upon where you place the camera, he could be pointing at the Texas School Book Depository or the stockade fence. And he says he's noticed that over the years that people certainly come to him and the questions they ask or the way they film the interview certainly inform him of what their beliefs are as far as the assassination. I believe Bill early on felt that there was a conspiracy. I'm not sure if he still feels that way today. I haven't spoken with him in a few years. I interviewed them several times for public programs around the 50th anniversary, all of which are on the museum's YouTube channel.
Oh, great.
We have hundreds of videos where we have eyewitnesses, police officers, reporters, Secret Service agents, all sharing memories, engaging in programs. There's even a terrific debate that I had the honor of moderating between Warren Commission staff member Howard Willans and House Select Committee on Assassinations Chief Counsel Robert Blakey.
Oh, man.
Who had very different perspectives on the story, and I'm kind of in the middle doing the best I can. You be the judge if you watch it on YouTube. But yeah, it's just one of those things. Certainly, what draws people here today is largely the mystery.
Yes.
We serve two audiences here at the museum. I mean, a site like the Plaza that's a site of great significance and tragedy, it affords us a responsibility, a societal obligation to do justice to a tragic event by remembering it properly. And with that sort of integrity of memory, it can serve two audiences very well. It can serve certainly the rememberers, like your mom, like my parents, who maybe visit and they're transported back to their 1963 persona. Perhaps it's a little cathartic to be here. For baby boomers, I find that there's a lot of unprocessed trauma, simply because there was not an outlet. There weren't school counselors at that time like there was for 9/11, and so many of these baby boomers, they were taught to be stoic and just
suck it up, go back to school.
Exactly. And so they internalized a lot of this,
yeah.
and I have seen it come out when they come to this site because they're communing with their younger self and sort of facing the meaning of that moment. So there is that. But there's also this growing number of younger people who don't have emotional connections to the assassination, but they are fascinated, depending upon what their entry point was, as we talked about earlier. They are far more fascinated by ballistics and bullet trajectories, and so you see them out there looking around as if somehow, because the plaza looks so much like it did, the answer's somehow still here in the grass. If I'm here long enough, if I commune with the site, I will know the truth. And it gives us a challenge and an opportunity to serve both of those audiences in meaningful ways that build bridges of communication between generations. And so it's always interesting to me to engage with people about their beliefs and to remind them that the broader story to this is what was lost and the impact that John F. Kennedy had on civil rights, on space and technology, and the Kennedys on arts and culture. I mean, that legacy is still very much with us today, and it all kind of ended here. And so you can look at Dealey Plaza as this kind of sacred space that holds the unfulfilled hope and promise that Kennedy represented. So I always try, when I'm talking about conspiracy theories and medical evidence and things like that, I always try to remind people that there is a bigger story here, and it's the story of this country in the second half of the 20th century, because you can say that the trajectory of the country, no pun intended, changed ever so slightly. And you start thinking about how would that civil rights legislation that Lyndon Johnson was able to push through Congress in 1964, how would that have fared for John F. Kennedy, who didn't have kind of the political clout that Johnson had? And Johnson also used Kennedy's memory as a way of forcing through that Civil Rights Act of 1964, voting rights in 1965. How would the Vietnam War have evolved had John F. Kennedy lived? Would he have won re-election against Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater? There is
his affairs too. I remember I heard there was an investigation going on of his extramarital affairs, and if that had come out during his lifetime, I don't know, 1964 might not have looked so good electorally.
It's tantalizing. The Plaza offers kind of, and it's one of the reasons why the Kennedy assassination lends itself so well to science fiction.
Sure.
Quantum Leap and the X-Files and the Umbrella Academy. I mean, all as Stephen King's book.
Yes.
All of these explorations of the assassination kind of hinge on what might have been, how history, everything around us could be different if those 6 to 8 seconds had not taken place in Dealey Plaza. And so it's I never lose sight of that. I've been driving my car here, parking outside this building for 25 years, and I never lose sight of the almost mystical significance that a site like this holds in terms of what might have been. That's at the heart of the Kennedy legacy.
Well, even things like, did you watch that Beatles documentary that just came out on Disney Plus? They mentioned the assassination pretty prominently in that.
Oh, okay.
Well, because the connection is that Beatles on Ed Sullivan come out in either February or March of '64.
February, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like just a couple months afterwards, and there's all this like pent up like psychic trauma that has been inflicted on the nation, and then this kind of burst of light, and it's like that. To me, that was interesting, because it kind of, just the outpouring of like Beatlemania that had to be partially fueled by this traumatic experience that the country just went through, and then there's this like fun, happy, exciting thing happening, and people are just like losing their minds because like they've been holding their breath for 3 months, so it's...
The Beatles do get mentioned a surprising amount in the Oral History Project as people start kind of reflecting on that post-assassination period. I ask them, how long was it before things went back to kind of this new post-assassination normal? And not quite to a person, but often they cite the Beatles as one of the things that helped to lift the spirits of the country and kind of remove some of those dark clouds left by November 22nd.
Sure. Go ahead and just tell us a little bit more about the museum. What else should people know about it? How can people support your work? What, you have any programs coming up that you want people to know about? If people want to donate items, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Sixth Floor Museum is an independent nonprofit, so we certainly appreciate any support that anyone would like to give us. They can go to our website, jfk.org, for more information on that. And that's also the portal to our online collections database, where you can find thousands of items, films, photographs, documents, about 900 of our oral histories fully digitized and accessible online, so it's a terrific resource. We also have an interactive motorcade map where you can travel along the route, the 10-mile motorcade with President Kennedy, and look at photographs and films taken at specific moments. There's also a kind of a walking tour of Dealey Plaza, which you can enjoy at home even without being, boots on the ground in Dealey Plaza. You can explore it in a number of different ways. So there's a lot of great online resources if people are not able to visit. And if they are able to visit, they can find more information about that as well, all on jfk.org, a pretty easy website to remember. We do have an exhibit opening within the next couple of weeks. It's an interesting exploration of the assassination through the eyes of a class of first grade students from Arizona. This filmmaker named Richard Snodgrass was watching assassination news coverage that weekend, and it inspired him to conduct an experiment, basically wondering how young kids react to a tragedy like this. And so what he did was, working with a local Catholic school, he got a class of 40 students, and he spent a week with them talking about the assassination, encouraging them to color with crayons and draw pictures of what they remember from seeing on television. And he also recorded about 3 hours worth of interviews with these 5 and 6-year-old kids. Wow. The result of that was a short film that was completed in 1968 and went to a couple of film festivals, and then it essentially kind of dropped out of sight. Recently, the widow of the art director donated the film and all the surviving drawings to the museum, and so we're going to be exhibiting for the first time ever this original crayon artwork by these students in Arizona that really trace the weekend of the assassination through a child's eyes, from the plane landing at Love Field, the motorcade, the shots being fired, Parkland Hospital, the funeral in Washington, the way the nation and the world responded, all through this really, really remarkable lens of early childhood. And the film is going to be playing. It's the first time the film has been publicly shown in about 60 years. Wow. And it's all narrated by these kids. It's their voices narrating their artwork, and it's moving. It's a very powerful window into how young people, and we talked earlier about baby boomers and kind of that internalization, but it's the innocence of childhood confronting the horrific tragedy of something inconceivable like the Kennedy assassination. So that exhibit, which is called Colorful Memories, is going to open. It's going to be up for almost a year, through early 2026, and that's part of that seventh floor experience. The seventh floor changes. We have programs, we have exhibits in that space on a relatively frequent basis. If people are interested in reaching out to me to share stories or memories of the assassination, they can reach me directly at oralhistory@jfk.org. That's my direct email, oralhistory@jfk.org, and collections@jfk.org is the email for people that have artifacts that they may want to donate to the museum. They can contact us there, and I may respond to emails from both of those, but certainly from the oral history address.
Well, thank you so much. You've been a great sport. I appreciate it. Thank you for giving me all this time. I appreciate it so much. I'd love to have you on again if you'd ever be willing. But one question I always ask before we go is, what music have you been listening to lately?
Oh my goodness. I can't believe I'm going to admit this in public, but I am a huge fan of Lana Del Rey.
Oh, nice.
And so I spend an inordinate amount of time listening to Lana Del Rey. She is when she visited Dallas last year, I really hoped that she might want a tour of the sixth floor museum. It would be such an honor to spend a few minutes with her, but she didn't. She went shopping in Oak Cliff, I understand, which is also a great place to visit with a lot of assassination history. It's where Oswald and Jack Ruby both lived. It's where J.D. Tippit was shot. It's where the backyard photographs were allegedly taken. So there's a lot of, and where Oswald was arrested at the Texas Theater. So Oak Cliff has a lot of great history associated with this subject as well. But yeah, Lana Del Rey. There you go.
That's great. I always love that question because I never know what I'm going to answer.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.